Good morning, Belinda Fettke. How you going?
I'm very well, thank you, Marty. How are you?
Yeah, really well. It's so lovely to chat, and it's a strange world we live in. That I grew up in a Seventh Day Adventist house, and till I was about 10, and lived everything you've been talking about, and then got involved in the whole low carb down under scene, and got into low carb nutrition to help money. And then you guys come along, and you've had quite a story, and then you completely dove down the rabbit hole of the background of our nutritional guidelines and how they're influenced by religious interests and a bunch of other interests.
Yeah.
And the two worlds collided and blew my mind. And you started talking about all the things that my parents were nutting out and trying to grapple with when I was just, about 10. And so that's completely fascinating. It brought back a whole lot of memories. And it's just really interesting to see how that all comes together. And so I wanted to get you on today just to give people a deeper understanding of potentially what has influenced our nutritional guidelines that may not be purely related to health and optimal nutrition, and just that world, that rabbit hole, to try and help us grapple with what optimal nutrition might look like. Yeah, so looking forward to chatting today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So a bit like you, when I started looking into this, I had no idea about any religious concepts. So I certainly didn't expect to find that. And I certainly didn't expect to researching it. So it has been very interesting.
Yeah, I suppose you've said a few times you're not anti-religious, and I think you're somewhat from a religious family, and I grew up in a very religious environment. But it's just interesting to understand how beliefs rather than nutrition have influenced how we eat today and the messaging around food. So to introduce, how did you fall into this rabbit hole? What's your backstory? It's quite fascinating.
It is an interesting backstory, and it began with Gary's own health. And I think a lot of people who've come to this low carb space have their own health journey, or they've seen somebody very close or a patient who has encouraged them to rethink what they've been taught with their medical education or their dietetic education. And ours certainly came from Gary's own health journey. He was diagnosed with a very aggressive pituitary tumour in the year 2000. And after losing his mum when he was only 16, he just did not want to not be here for his kids.
Yeah, wow.
So he had a craniotomy where they actually took his skull off and pulled his entire face down, had to learn to walk. It was a horrific surgery. He had stereotactic radiotherapy for 3 months in Sydney, and then he was on chemotherapy on and off for the next 11 and a half years. He had more surgery in 2004. Because despite modern medicine, they could not control it. And I'm not saying those things weren't really important, because Gary's tumour was found at a very advanced stage. So all of that modern medicine was essential for him to be here today. But we were never told about nutrition. And in looking back, that's probably the biggest missing piece that could have potentially and did end up putting his cancer into remission. So he has still got cancer, but he's been off chemotherapy purely by using diet for over 7 years now. And so
he's off to play golf right now. He popped on the call before, and he was bright and shiny and happy and looking radiant, and just such a lovely guy. So.
Off to golf. And so he improved his own health. He reversed his type 2 pre-diabetes, his blood pressure, and all the medications that they kept putting him on to band-aid the side effects of other medications. Like, he's come off 10 medications, and to look at his health just get better and better. And then he started to think, when he worked it out in 2011, 2012, well, how can I take this into my orthopedic practice and help my patients who are literally, it's a tsunami of type 2 diabetes complications and metabolic disease. So he started to understand very quickly that recommending patients reduce sugar, and if you think about it, he can tell people to stop smoking, even though he's not qualified in that space. He can tell people to exercise, all of those things. For some reason, telling people to reduce sugar hit a nerve with the Dietitians Association of Australia. And he was reported to the medical board in 2014 he was reported 3 times, and the
Mm.
second one was because he was inappropriately reversing type 2 diabetes, or he claimed to. So they investigated him for 2.5 years, a star chamber investigation. Like, they just did not stop coming at him. He virtually produced a thesis
Yep.
on the metabolic model of modern disease,
Yeah.
and reached out to so many people who had done specific research in this space. And as you say, it's looking at the biochemistry. If you look simply at the science and you take out the emotion, which I know is a big thing we've discussed on and off.
Yeah.
Take out the emotion, take out the beliefs, take out all those other things, and you simply look at the biochemistry, then low carb makes sense.
Yep.
And telling people to reduce sugar makes sense when they're presenting with the complications of type 2 diabetes. They're requiring debridement and amputation of their feet. Like, anything you can do to help people in that space has to be good. So that's where my research started.
Gary's literally chopping off people's feet because of diabetes complications and saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't be eating so much sugar in your diet, and it would help manage your type 1 or type 2 diabetes. I suppose with Monia, we've found the same thing is reducing carbohydrate. I mean, not that all carbohydrates are bad, and it got more complex as we dug down the rabbit hole of looking at nutrient density as the primary issue. But I remember when we were trying to have kids and she was pregnant, we'd go up to the hospital and they'd say, you have to get your HbA1c down lower, and otherwise it's going to be complications. And we go, how? And they go, I don't know, you just have to do it. They just couldn't give you useful nutritional advice that would help you achieve better goals. And it's like, what? And then once we dug into it, and life changed, the quality of life changed, and you can't unsee that. You can't not want to share that, I suppose. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Gary says the same thing. Once you see the health benefits, you can't unsee them.
Yeah.
So when the medical board came out in 2016 after 2.5 years and determined that he was silenced, and it was lifelong and non-appellable under the courts of law for him to be able to ever talk about science of nutrition ever again. And he just chose to disrespect that because he said, I'm not going to abide by a law that will cause harm to my patients. But we had to fight, and it took another 2 years before it eventually was overturned. And the only way we could do it was through the process. The process had to be flawed, not the actual determination. So it was the crazy system. 4.5 years. My husband was subjected at a similar time frame to Prof. Tim Noakes in South Africa. They went through a very similar thing, but Tim's was very public and Gary's was all behind closed doors. But you just think, this is ridiculous. And so the more and more I looked into it, the main thing I started researching, because when they came after my husband, I can tell you, the mama bear came out. It was like, have you seen what my husband's dealt with? Have you seen what his patient, like how he feels when he comes home after amputating someone, disfiguring someone for life? This is ridiculous. So I watched Gary, who joined Rod Taylor with low carb in 2013, Low Carb Down Under. I watched these guys talking the science. I mean, nobody's listening. Well, people are listening, but the people who are running the guidelines aren't listening. So there has to be more to this. And Gary just went, oh, you do whatever you want. I am. So the expert witness in the APRA medical board, actually pronounced APRA, I think, but I just APRA, they don't deserve that highfalutin sounding word. So APRA, when I looked at the expert witness that was brought in to determine if an orthopedic surgeon could talk about sugar or not, I thought he must work for the sugar industry. And I was pretty good at looking up a few things on social media at the time, so I went on the internet, and I thought, I'm going to have a look and search. And I was totally surprised to find he was actually working for Sanitarium Health Food Company. Maybe it's not the sugar industry, maybe it's the cereal industry coming after Gary, which would also make a lot of sense. And when I told the medical board, we submitted documents showing that he worked for them. They wrote back and said, we don't believe you. We believe Mark Walquist. And I was like, how can you not believe me? I've just submitted these things. So that began the deep rabbit hole.
Mama Bear kept going. You've been married. You've been with Gary for 40 years now.
40 years.
It's just a wonderful love story of you standing up and trying to defend his honour for what you've been through. Yeah.
If the medical board had just picked someone local, a dietitian or a doctor or someone, I probably wouldn't have gone anywhere near this. I would never have met you. We still would be in the backwaters here in Tassie going, why is no one listening? It's incredible. It was their mistake in inviting this guy or having this man as the expert witness and then not believing us and continuing to listen to him. And so I just kept going deeper and deeper and came across the International Life Sciences Institute. Ilse, his wife, works for them. So then that sent me down the Coca-Cola path. And then I looked at lifestyle medicine because he was the patron for lifestyle medicine at the time. And so all of these things, I started to realize there was a symbiotic relationship happening between the beliefs of the Seventh Day Adventist Church, who wholly owned Sanitarium, and the food industry and vested interests. And when these groups come together, they are very powerful allies.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing to understand, like, the religious belief system plus the ethical belief system plus the financial food industry. When they all come together in an alliance, it's incredibly powerful in not just controlling the dietary guidelines and influencing that and not being able to change it, but also the messaging and the greenwashing of our food system. And it's very subtle but very powerful. And, like, it's just amazing how much you've dug up about how the origins of the SDA Church and really nutritional science, in inverted commas, and the SDA movement started at the same time. They're very intertwined and are basically endemic throughout our current understanding of our beliefs about nutrition, which, like you said, are not often based on the biochemical reactions in our body or nutrient density or anything related to actual health. It comes back to belief. So,
well, who would fund nutrition science? The Harvard School of Public Health was literally bankrolled by the food industry back in the 1940s.
Yeah.
And so you look at this influence, you think, well, of course, because they want to prove that their products are good, and then you've got the 1970s where saturated fat was demonized. It's all been working together. I think what's important to understand is the religious, the ethical beliefs and the vested interests all have the same outcome. They want to promote a plant-based diet, but they want it not to be a wholesome plant-based diet.
Yeah.
It's about, because if you understand that the Seventh Day Adventist Church own, I think, 23 food industries worldwide, they're producing food, which Ellen G. White, their founder, stated when she came to Australia to set up Sanitarium. The health food business is to supply the people with food which will take the place of flesh meat, milk, and butter. And so this is their mission, and they haven't stopped. They now produce, I think, 140 different food products, and they've gone into not only the soy milks and the almond milks and all those things, because now they're really getting into that. It's not just Wheat Bix and up and go. But they also own a brand called the Alternative Meat Company. And this alternative meat company is sort of hidden a bit below because they've got their Sanitarium branding and they've got their Life Health Food branding. Life Health Foods isn't as easy to connect the dots to Sanitarium, but it is under their umbrella. And then they go another layer down by having this alternative meat company. And when you go to their website, it is animal rights activism on their website. It's not the health and well-being thing on Sanitarium. And they are talking about the harms of cattle, what they're doing to the environment, and we need to make alternative meat. Well, this is a really, where did our ideas of health food come from? And they have come from the Seventh Day Adventist Church all the way back in the 1800s when John Harvey Kellogg was a devout Adventist and he created the very first health foods, commercial health foods.
Based on the writings of Ellen G. White and her belief system around the impacts of meat on sexual function to try and stop vice and self-harm.
She was given those messages from God that meat caused physical, spiritual, and moral degeneration. And the moral part was definitely masturbation, which was considered a heinous sin at that time. And by a lot of temperance health reformers. There were others that also thought that same thing in the 1800s. But John Harvey Kellogg was only 12 years old when he first started typesetting her sermons and her books. And this book, A Solemn Appeal to Mothers, was purely about helping mothers deter their children from masturbating. And she said, do not
and it's
put
hard when
meat
you've
on the
grown
plate.
up with that belief to unbelieve that and to not see it in that paradigm, and that influence on nutritional science has just been phenomenal. And also the longevity thing. I was looking back into, Ellen White taught that after the flood and Noah, people were permitted to eat animal flesh, and that
but it would shorten their sinful lives,
shorten their lifespan from down to 400 years. And I just can't see the biggest messaging I see around anti-meat is that it'll shorten your lifespan, and even the smartest people in nutrition research say, oh yeah, protein's good, protein leverage is amazing, it'll help you reach an optimal body composition, but it'll also shorten your life. And it's like, whoa. Everything in metabolic science comes back to not being over fat. Everything in metabolism comes back to having good blood sugars, a good body composition, waist to height, body fat percentage, but then it'll shorten your life. Where did that come from? There's no nutrition science, there's no human data that validates that, but it's just an endemic belief system in all of nutrition that, protein's good, but it'll also shorten your life. It's just mind-blowing, and that's all it seems to stem back to, is just this belief system that's come through.
The dean of the College of Medical Evangelists, which was what the Loma Linda University was called in the US, which is wholly owned by the church. So the College of Medical Evangelists dean it's on record as telling, I can't remember the name of the guy who said it, but he said that he was told that it would take a few generations of eating, and they call it vegetarian diet, and it sounds much more palatable, but it's total vegetarian if you look at the Seventh Day Adventist beliefs, because it's the Garden of Eden diet. It's fruits, grains, nuts, and seeds, no animal products at all. And he said Ellen G. White taught that it would take a few generations of people eating just a vegan diet, and then longevity would start to come back. And she hoped it would come back to the 400, 800 years of longevity. And it's fascinating that this concept of an ancestral diet and evolution does not exist to the Seventh Day Adventist Church, because science is the Bible. And so when you have such an incredible purpose and belief, as you say, that this is what was said, Ellen G. White told us as the prophetess, the founder of our church, all these things, we've got to look to the Bible. And so if they believe that Adam and Eve were given a vegan diet in the Garden of Eden, and it wasn't until they sinned that they were eating meat and shortening lives from there, then that's a very powerful messaging. And this idea that before translation, before you can be saved and go back to heaven, you have to have given up flesh meat. So they don't make it a condition of joining the church, and they certainly don't push it really hard at the beginning. But their idea is, as you work, and certainly for the health professionals that are teaching this medical evangelism, they want to get people to give up flesh, meat, milk, butter, and eggs. And a classic example is the Sanitarium's CHIP program. It's the Complete Health Improvement Program. Originally, the Coronary Health Improvement Program developed by Hans Deal at Loma Linda University. And this program, even though Sanitarium says, it's not a mandate for vegan or vegetarian diets, when you look at the facilitator's guide, it has meat, eggs, and dairy as the top of the list of the worst health outcomes. They're the furthest along to that red sign. And someone did say to me that they were concerned that, the results weren't that great on the CHIP program and you don't need to worry about it. But I can assure you, they have got 35 years of research behind this CHIP program. They can't afford to let it go, because that's their leverage. And whether they rename it under the LIFT project or Elio Wellness or whatever, Vitality Works, whatever Sanitarium wants to rename it under these programs, the CHIP program is there, and that is the basis of their nutrition education. Vitality Works for the New South Wales government. They're employed. This is a Sanitarium is employed by the New South Wales government to provide workplace wellness based on the beliefs of the Seventh Day Adventist Church.
So unpack what medical evangelism means and hastening the second coming of Christ. That's fascinating from a belief and motivational perspective of,
Well,
what's the end goal?
Yeah, I think Ellen worked out very early on, Ellen and her husband James, that by taking the gospel through medicine, they truly believe that Jesus wasn't a carpenter and healed people via miracles. They believe he was the great physician.
Mm.
He healed people, and in healing people, taking that message, he was able to get an entering wedge to their hearts to then lead them to the gospel. And so Ellen G. White was told that the Seventh Day Adventist Church were the remnant church, and they were commissioned by God to tell the gospel message and get people to believe and to be converted and go back to heaven. So it's not 100% legalistic religion, but it's getting there. They believe in faith, but also obedience. And so this obedience is medical evangelism, and they don't care what level. So there's 21 million or so people who are part of the Seventh Day Adventist Church, and they have a total. It's the total movement. I think there's a process going on at the moment. Every single person within the church is to be a medical evangelist at whatever level they can be, and whether that's cooking schools for your local community, running the CHIP program, whether it's in church, community, wellness, workplace wellness, or in hospitals. And they're taking a whole lot of different programs. There's the New Start program, there's CHIP, there's Vitality Works, there's, what's the other one called? Creation Health. And so you look at all these different programs and projects that are running all around the world. I believe lifestyle medicine is the latest one in that space. But this idea that you join medical and gospel work together, it's far more powerful. They've gone into 235 recognized United Nations countries. And the way they've been able to do a lot of that is either through education or through medical assistance. And they're really, really proud. So it's not like I've just made these things up. I've just found over and over again the acknowledgement that they have used these tools to get into countries and into religions that they would never have been able to access, except that they've gone in offering medical help or gone in offering to educate. We'll provide a school, we'll provide education, all of these things. It's very, very clever marketing. And then on top of those, they add the food industries. So then we'll help supply your food and we'll train your nurses and we'll, it's a package. And it is beyond what most other religions are able to create in this point in time.
And then they believe that they can hasten the second coming of Christ by observing the Sabbath and not eating meat. If you can get more people converted and more people to observe their health doctrine, then they can, the whole SDA Church from William Miller to 1844, great disappointment, to now they're looking forward to the second coming that didn't happen in 1844. They want to bring that forward. That's like the ultimate momentum of the church. So it's a mission. It's a massive, heartfelt, deep-seated mission that is hard to change with any other contradictory information. So I just find that fascinating.
They're an apocalyptic church. So they are praying for the end of the world. This is their belief.
And looking. So let's talk about the dietary guidelines and the origin of the dietary guidelines and where that started and how that's potentially influenced how we currently view nutritional science.
Okay, so again, you go back to the 1800s and you've got the church paying for John Harvey Kellogg to do medicine. So they opened the Battle Creek Sanitarium as the Western Health Reform Institute in the 1870s. And in 1876, John Harvey Kellogg came in as the medical superintendent, and he developed a medical program within that group, and then he started training nurses, and by the late 1800s, certainly training the beginning of dietetics. He split from the church in 1910, 1911, but he still was grounded in their original beliefs. And I have, from what I've read, he was still very, very fond of Ellen G. White right through to the end of his life. He took over their Good Health magazines and all the productions. So he was instrumental in a lot of medical education worldwide. He wrote textbooks, many, many textbooks. He set up this dietetic training, and under him, and he and his wife from the Battle Creek Sanitarium, a woman called Lena Francis Cooper, became the founder or co-founder of the American Dietetic Association, with the belief that fruits, nuts, and seeds are the God-appointed diet for man. So I'm not sure if she was a Seventh-day Adventist, but her brothers certainly were. And she was very involved in that whole community. She was working at Battle Creek Sanitarium. So she wrote the dietetics textbooks for, I think, 30 or 40 years, hugely involved in that whole beginning. And then you've got Kellogg's, had the very, very first, they employed the very first dietitian in the 1930s, and she became a consultant to the government for the Second World War on rations. So everyone says, oh, Ansel Keys was the instigator, but it was also a lot to do with Kellogg's as well. So those food rationings, it was a combination of both of them. And so, again, while William Keith, who ended up owning Kellogg's completely, he stepped away from John Harvey after they'd invented and done things. He wanted to add sugar to his product, but still with that same belief that fruit, nuts, and seeds are the God-appointed diet for man, taking this messaging further and further. In 1948, a guy called Mervyn Harding was at the College of Medical Evangelists. He went to do his doctoral dissertation at Harvard University with Fred Astaire, which I said was bankrolled by the food industry. So you can imagine, here's this guy who's needing to provide information to say the food industry, we need to create foods. And then you've got Mervyn Harding coming across going, we need to demonize saturated fat and meat because plants are the thing. It was,
we need to prove it's magic. The right way.
Prove, not disprove, divine inspiration, yes. So their research started being published in 1954 by, certainly they were involved, the College of Medical Evangelists, which became Loma Linda, were involved in the Senate Commission from McGovern in 1977. Nathan Pritikin was an adjunct professor at Loma Linda University, and he was so close to George McGovern that George McGovern gave his eulogy. And again, his program was low-fat, anti-meat. Hans Dill, who devised this CHIP program, worked for Nathan Pritikin at the Longevity Centre. And so it all just starts to, meld together.
Incredibly interrelated, isn't it?
Yeah, the guy who wrote the first dietary goals was a Seventh Day Adventist. So he wanted to put a bit more of a spin and a twist on it. And then you look at it, 1977 became the demonization of saturated fat.
Yep.
Well, I think 2020 has become the demonization of animal proteins as well.
Yeah.
And in my mind, medical evangelism, this lifestyle medicine group, which was founded in 2003 as the Christian Association of Lifestyle Medicine on the Loma Linda University campus, has not only taken, so there's, I think, 10 medical universities around the world that are owned by the church. And one of them is very aligned in America, but there are 10 currently, and a lot of them in third world countries. So, of course, they want to educate doctors in third world countries to promote less meat. It's a much easier target, can I say, than in Australia, potentially, unless we can be convinced that it's harming the planet. So they've got these medical education, and then they've got lifestyle medicine that's currently getting into every continent in the world. And they're running exams for this American College of Lifestyle Medicine, overarching under the International Board of Lifestyle Medicine. They're getting associations all around the world. And when you do these exams, you are sitting in an exam that's been written and co-written, by people who are devout Seventh-day Adventists. And it seems to be a group of people working for Coca-Cola's Exercises Medicine has moved in with them. And so the exams are set on the plant-based Garden of Eden diet with a side of Coke. That's what I'm sort of looking at. And while the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine is trying to minimize the impact of religion within that society, they are still advertising that you study lifestyle medicine at Avondale College, which is owned by the Seventh Day Adventist Church. And they're advertising the Lifestyle Medicine Education Collaborative, which has been written by Seventh Day Adventists and the Coca-Cola Group, or Exercise Medicine. Yep. And they want to get it into medical education in Australia right now. And so I guess I've become so vocal because I looked into all of this for about 2 years, and I just said to Gary, I just don't know if I can talk about this, because the idea of religion is quite confronting to me, and I know it's very confronting to a lot of people when I first present it. But Gary said to me, they are, Sanitarium specifically, which is the commercial arm of the church, which pays no tax because they come under their charity status, they are writing resources for doctors, they are shaping guidelines on the technical advisory experts for the health star ratings. So, of course, processed foods getting a much better rating than pure mince. When you look at what they're developing, all these things, and recently the loophole that was found that Sanitarium pushed for plant-based milks has now allowed plant-based meat to get through and be called meat. And so I know that right now the government's trying to close this loophole that somehow slipped through because Sanitarium lobbied for it early in the 2000s. But they're a very, very influential group, and they've made us believe that they are the health and wellness of Australia. So Gary just said to me, we have to talk about this because it's impacting my patients, it's impacting me. I'm being reported to the medical board and being silenced from talking about this. So this has to come out. And so hence you heard about me and my research, and I haven't stopped doing it because I think it's vitally important. And it's not that I'm against people who choose to be Seventh-day Adventists and follow those dietary guidelines if that's what they choose to do. But it's about transparency. And as you've pointed out through all your incredible work, where are we getting our optimum nutrition? Where are these nutrients sitting? And they're not just in fruits, grains, nuts, and seeds, unfortunately.
Yeah.
People who are on a vegan diet, if you look at the Adventist health studies, they actually classify a vegan diet as someone who eats meat, fish, milk, eggs, cheese, all those things, less than once a month. But their public health messaging doesn't say that. The public, the young people who are choosing a vegan diet, who are reading that vegan is healthy, do not know that it actually potentially includes the tiniest amounts of all the essential nutrients we need are still included in that diet. So I've gotten loud, and I'm not grumpy, but I just think it's a really, really important discussion. And as you said,
incredibly passionate. It's amazing how the medical evangelism with a belief-based nutritional system optimized with the belief of, dampening sexual desire and sexual function is now influencing massively, not just the dietary guidelines, but the medical education, as you said, through lifestyle medicine. And it's just an amazing alignment between religious belief system and a plant-based ethical belief system and big food and agriculture that is just enables a open door to drive a Mack truck of sugar, industrial seed oils and refined grains into a food system that are the most nutrient poor thing you could eat. But the cheapest, most hyper-palatable foods we could choose as well. So it worked so beautifully for all parties, because from a religious point of view, nobody's eating meat anymore. Nobody's eating animal products. From a belief plant-based system, we're not eating animal products, which is apparently going to save the planet. And then from a food, big food, money-making engine, it's just like, wow, bring it on. So, and they don't have to come out and say, here's our original teachings that have influenced our thinking, this is how you should eat. It's just this really subtle greenwashing. And if you tell the 14-year-old girl that she'll save the planet and save her health, then it's optimal to not eat any animal product. All you have to do is eat a plant-based diet, which is not spinach, asparagus, and mushrooms and nuts. It's just, anything that's not plant-based. So anything that doesn't contain animal products, which
health food bar.
ends up being the most
cereal.
nutrient-poor, hyper-palatable, high-profit margin food you can create. And it's just, like you, it's hard to unsee that and back away from that. And you want to present the data, and you're presenting the history. I'm presenting hey, we need nutrients in food. What do you need? Nutrients without excess calories. Where are you going to get that from? Let's look at the data to understand that.
Well, I read that Ellen G. White's granddaughter lived with her until she passed away. So when Ellen G. White was in Australia, her son married a Tasmanian girl, would you believe? And they went back to America. And so this granddaughter, or two granddaughters, I think they were, lived with Ellen G. White at her home in the last 5 years of her life, I believe. And they had their own cattle, because she talks about it, for milk. And Ellen G. White taught butter was just a sin. You're not allowed to have butter from 1860, like butter. But she said that they had milk and cream on their toast. Well, surely you just need a few more churns of that cream and it's butter. This doesn't make sense. And they had their own chickens, so they ate their own eggs. So while Ellen G. White was anti all of these things and taught all these messages, she was still having from her own animals on her own property fresh milk, cream, and eggs. And I think, people also don't understand, she said there a time would come when these things would be too dangerous to eat. But her family stayed healthy because they were still eating them.
I don't think the SDA diet is necessarily purely plant-based, and I think the ethical and potentially financial elements have leveraged that even more. But the SDA at the core isn't necessarily. It's basically a vegetarian diet with some dairy, and
it is until you look closer at what the medical evangelists, like the pure people who are taking it on as a commission, are definitely pushing total vegetarian, which is a vegan diet. And that's the concern. These are the ones who are getting into dietary guidelines, like Joan Sabat, he was on the 2020 US Dietary Guidelines Committee. He wrote The Global Influence of the Seventh Day Adventist Church in 2018, which was published in Religions. And he said nutrition science pretty much began with the advent of the church, which you mentioned earlier. And people like him, people like the guys who are starting lifestyle medicine and really promoting that, are total believers that we need to get rid of all of these things. And we do have the ability now. We have created enough food substitutes and soy. We've been able to manufacture soy to be able to get rid of milk, meat, eggs, and butter. And as I say, but their vegan diet does not say they have to do it all the time. It just has to be less than once a month. But I do believe that these people who are promoting it at the top level, at the head of nutrition, research, and everywhere else, they are promoting a pure vegan diet.
Yeah, I saw something on social the other day about, people are looking at injecting something so people become allergic to meat. And it's like, oh, wow, this is a crazy world we're living in.
Like a cigarette patch.
do you have any thoughts on whether it's a good idea to optimize your diet to minimize sexual function and sexual vice, as they called it? I mean, everything we see is, optimum fertility, attractiveness, vitality aligns with a healthy body mass index, body composition, and
not to Ellen. We were born with a certain amount of vitality, and every time we had sexual relations, even marital relations, depleted our vitality. So no, she was very anti the whole concept of everything because she wanted to be vital for a long time. So no, I don't. I think the whole idea. I read somewhere that cornflakes were just an anti-masturbation crusade. That's how they started out, and it's honestly true. John Harvey Kellogg produced food that was bland, that wouldn't irritate. He wanted to produce food that would flush through the bowel really quickly because they believed any pressure in the bowel would then put pressure on the male prostate and sexually arouse him. So this was this whole thing about doing yogurt enemas all the time and just eating high fiber food, so you were just always empty and you had no opportunity to get any sensation in there. So
I'm not aware of any science to back up that I'm these days. But
no.
anyway.
But we still do hear that masturbation causes blindness. I'm sure I heard that when I was a kid.
But just optimizing your diet to minimize sexual
Yeah,
function just seems so antithetical to
it does.
everything we know now about optimal vitality.
It does, but what if your religion was that Jesus was coming soon, which she truly believed he would come in her lifetime? John Harvey Kellogg's parents were such devout Adventists, they didn't send their children to school. I think they had 12 or 15 kids. They didn't send them to school because it was going to be a waste of money and time and effort, because he was about to come back and save them all. So, we're talking about a group of people who didn't see beyond. They just truly believed that Jesus was going to come back within their lifetime. So to put these things in place to minimize it didn't matter about procreation, because it wasn't really going to be that important, because the generations, as time went on, she said, well, now I've been told we can't sit idly by, so we need to invest in education and we need to work out, because we haven't got enough people believing this. Jesus doesn't see the point in coming back when there's not enough people to save. It's pretty much a waste of his time.
They need to get 144,000 true believers, and then Christ will return as one of the beliefs that's up and gone. And anyway,
exactly. I think, so this idea of minimizing metabolic health, I don't think was even considered back then, how it would actually impact and going forward into future generations. I don't believe they thought that far ahead. Her messaging was for then, the present truth, and they thought that would be the end.
Yeah. So a bit of a hit list of people or organisations you've dug into is quite fascinating. The blue zones. A lot of people talking about blue zones. We should eat like the blue zones. Tell me about the blue zones and
okay. So the blue zones, I've been looking into that. I've looked at a lot of Weston A. Price's work and seen that his concept and certain Sally Fallon's understanding and writings about his work as well. All looked into blue zones were ancestral diets. Most of them were really isolated places. A lot of them were surrounded by water, like Okinawa is just a million miles from anywhere and totally surrounded by water. You can't tell me those people ate plants. They would have fished. And when the Japanese...
There's a lot of fish and pork, I believe.
A lot of fish and pork. And when the Japanese did their studies on the longevity, not a single person was on an only plant-based diet, despite what Dan Buttner and the Blue Zones would have us believe. I've looked at the Italian guys who actually were looking at longevity and everything else. Again, they said it might have been a plant-based diet, but it included animal proteins and fats. There wasn't a single one that they came across that didn't include those things. Dan Buttner, if you look at his original work and some of the interviews that he did, he talked about the fact that people were eating meat. But by the time he developed his Blue Zones plant slant diet, that was really based on Loma Linda, which is one of the Blue Zones, which is a Seventh Day Adventist retirement place and medical hub of the world. He's pushed 95% plants as the recommended diet. In the meantime, the Blue Zones have been very involved with the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. They're also involved with the World Economic Forum, and Dan Buttner has spoken at that, and he's trying to align his Blue Zones with their vision of build back better and put us all into a plant-based diet for the world. And unfortunately, they're also aligned with a lot of food industry and pharma and biotech and everyone else to create our food. Our food. So, but the Blue Zones was bought by Adventist Health in 2020. So they're already in 50 different communities in the United States. So you've got the Adventist Health has got something like 47 hospitals in the US. They've got 227 hospitals worldwide, only one in Australia. The footprint here is very, very small. But in America, they contribute so much to the American health system with their clinics and hospitals and their all the work that they're doing. Now that they own the blue zones as well, and they've gotten into 50 more communities and growing, I mean, they're taking that message that meat is bad and animal fats are bad, and we need to get rid of them out of your diet for health. And my concern is, where's the transparency? It's not about health. This is about a belief that they will bring Jesus back if they promote this dietary message. And it's been fascinating.
So you're probably about to hear a lot more about the Blue Zone project and all the benefits of the Blue Zones, and you'll live longer if you eat like the people in the Blue Zones who didn't eat meat.
No, if you eat like people at Loma Linda, it's not about all the other Blue Zones. They've all been hijacked.
And like you said, like most people in the SDA Church are very health conscious, but at the same time, from what I see, not everybody thrives on processed foods for their entire life. Anyway, I don't see the vibrant health necessarily. Like my uncle went low carb after becoming type 2 diabetic and changed his health, and decades of I lived on Wheat Bix till I was 18 or whatever as a main staple, and every time I come home I eat a whole lot, and I was very large and not particularly healthy. So
I think it's important to understand that some people within the church, they believe that gluttony is a sin. So a lot of people in the church who are committed to the message tend to try and stay lighter weight. And because they're keeping their weight down, maybe they can avoid some of the complications of some of the things, as long as they are eating some of the essential nutrients, or they have the privilege in Western society of being able to supplement, have their vitamin B12 injections and things. It's not a complete diet. But I've spoken to people in the US who are in less socioeconomically developed areas, and they said every single person in their church is sick. Every single person has type 2 diabetes, and they buy the church's food. They buy the foods that are made by the church. They're eating processed food all the time because they're taught that they're supporting the church. Like, this is a donation to the church, tax deductible donation. Not tax deductible, sorry. It's just a pure donation to the church every time you buy their products, because they don't pay any tax on them. So they are encouraged to buy the products, and they eat them thinking that they're health food. So you look at, what was his name? John Wright. And I'm not picking on him for his beliefs, and he did amazing things, I think, for health and bringing humor into health and all sorts of things over the 1970s, 80s, 90s. But he developed lung cancer and bowel cancer, and he swears he was a vegetarian his entire life. And after he got, and never smoked, and after he got lung cancer, he pretty much went onto a diet of just eating, I think he said he ate 21 bananas, Wheat Bix and soy milk, and then he got bowel cancer. So you can't avoid these things necessarily just because you're eating a vegan or vegetarian diet either. And this is a high-profile media celebrity of the Seventh Day Adventist Church. So I don't believe a vegan diet gives health. It depends what you're eating, I guess. And Gary, I mean, that's why we went down this path. Gary's cancer feeds on glucose sugar. So for him, he needs to be a very low-carb eater, because any carbohydrate is spiking or has the potential to put his cancer back to becoming active. So it's individualizing it, which is what you're doing such an incredible job. That's what your work is, just really sitting at the heart of individualizing and optimizing nutrition for people with specific needs. I mean, for everybody, but specific needs as well. So it's acknowledging that some people need to be very low carb or almost no carb or no carb. Other people, they're perfectly well eating some carbohydrates. But the processed crap that's got no nutrient in it, we should just be all ditching.
Exactly. And if you just reframe science to say you need to get the nutrients without excess calories, it would turn everything on its head. Doing
but it would bankrupt the food industry, and I don't want to hear that.
They probably want to shut you down for that.
And
luckily I'm an engineer, and they haven't come at me for Engineers Association doesn't care what I say. But Diabetes Association, any thoughts on associations?
My concern is that we've been trying to speak to the Diabetes Association. I know James Mucky's having a lot more success than we ever did. But when Gary started talking about sugar in 2012, it was a taboo subject. And when you understand in 2014, 2015, 16, the Dietitians Association of Australia had a corporate partnership with the Australian Breakfast Cereal Manufacturing Forum, Cereal for Brekkie. That was what they traded as. And that includes Sanitarium, Kellogg's, Nestle, and Freedom Foods. And their partnership with the DAA was for the DAA to use their members. So the members may have been completely unaware, but they were to use their members to influence, protect, and actively defend cereal, grains, and sugars messaging. This has come from the cereal industry to determine and dictate these measures. So dietitians had no idea. So like when you said you and Monty were in hospital and when Gary was having his tumour at the beginning. So when he started talking about sugar, it was taboo, even though it's been talked about previously and been dampened down. So we have to be able to talk about what's best for individuals.
Yeah.
It's just so important.
And dietitians in Australia who don't toe the party line are shut down very, very quickly, and
they lose their job.
Get reimbursement. Yeah.
Because the Dietitians Association of Australia, the dietitians. Sorry, we're going Diabetes Australia, but Diabetes Australia are also funded by the pharmaceutical industry in such a huge way. Their board members have got ties, and it makes it very complicated. They want to frame diabetes as a disease because that means type 2 diabetes as a disease, because then they can sell medication. They can prescribe things. If it's not a disease anymore, if it's something that's just a lifestyle and can be reversed, oh dear, that's not good, because they don't need to exist anymore. And same with Heart Foundation. What if cardiovascular disease was going at a rate of knots? And you look at the obesity, World Obesity and the Obesity Australia, the Obesity College, all of these things, obesity's just gotten worse and worse since they were invented. And again, they want to classify obesity as a disease because that allows them to have prescribed medication, and that just funds pharma. It's not about health.
Yeah, and if we got everybody off the insulin and diabetes medications, so many people potentially stand to lose financially from that if we could just give them the food they need to dial that in. And it's definitely very possible, and we, you and I see it all the time, but it's just crazy. So Eat Lancet?
Eat Lancet. Eat Lancet.
There's a deep rabbit hole.
That's a very, very deep rabbit hole, and I certainly referenced your work, did a big deep dive a couple of years ago into the Eat Lancet, and sort of showcasing that these so-called 27 scientists, there was only one nutritionist, and that was Walter Willett, who is sitting in Fred Stairs' chair at Harvard University, which was bankrolled by the food industry. He keeps claiming he has no ties, but Nina has found some associations. But his department is bankrolled by the food industry. And he was on the board of directors of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine from its founding at Loma Linda University. So he is aligned with that messaging, and he has continued to be aligned with that messaging going all the way through appeasing Adventists, appeasing food industry, whatever else. This Eat Lancet diet suggests that we pretty much malnourish ourselves and eat the tiniest amount of lean meat. As you worked out, it shows all these vegetables and fruits and everything else, but really it's cereal and grain-based. It's terrible that this group can seem so authoritative, and we need to be showcasing your work in particular. This isn't nutrients. This isn't optimizing nutrition in any way, shape, or form. This is providing information for the food industry. Oh, thank you for bringing it up. Look at that.
Yeah. I took their recommendations and looked at what it looked like on a percentage of calories, and it's mainly rice, wheat, and corn with industrial seed oils, and then the actual
That made me cry.
Intake. I can't find the vegetable intake. There it is, 3% of calories
there it is,
from
yes.
vegetables.
But the plate, show the plate now. The plate looks much prettier than that. You've ruined it.
That's what the modern plant-based diet looks like. And then they talk about macronutrient intake, and they've confused food groups with macronutrients. But anyway, and then you've got who's interested in funding this. It's crazy, the financial backing.
The financial backing, and it was with the elite have no right to be dictating how the masses will eat when it doesn't affect them. And I think that's a really important thing as well. Gunhild Stordalen, who is created that EAT part of the EAT Lancet, she and her husband, billionaires or ex-husband now, but they were traveling the world in private jet planes and doing all sorts of things. She had a pinky promise with Sandro De Mayo, who's now the head of Vic Health, to try a vegan diet for a few weeks and just see what it was like. So she wasn't even eating a pure vegan diet when she was helping dictate that this is how the masses should go forward. And it's so wrong.
And these are the pictures of the food that they recommend, which look beautiful, but the actual nutrient density of what ends up being a plant-based diet to save the world is just horrific. And like you say, the people in developing countries, they really need the animal-based foods to get their B12 and iron and protein. And did you go to Vanuatu with Gary?
I didn't go to Vanuatu. I went to Indonesia, but I didn't get to Vanuatu. Gary went to Vanuatu 3 years to do medical aid, foreign aid work there, and he just said Coca-Cola had taken over. Like, they didn't have type 2 diabetes before Coca-Cola and Western food, processed food, moved in there.
We went over there about 9 years ago and then 5 years ago, and just the change over 5 years from the Chinese moving in and building all the roads and schools and bankrolling the government. It's like they're taking over the country by force, and then dumping all the processed food in there. And they love the Oreos and they love the vegetable oil, and they blow up.
And they're told it's illegal to fish, in certain areas now. And these restrictions on people being able to provide their own essential nutrients and bombarding them instead with hyper-palatable, addictive foods that I can just buy, that's cheap, feed our family. You go, this is really concerning. People are being restricted from getting their own food.
Yeah, it's crazy. And they're just selling off all their beautiful food they produce. They produce the best food in the world, tastes incredible. And that goes to the resorts, and then they go to the market and sell their food and buy the convenience food next door. And it's diabolical what's happening to their health and the Aboriginal health. And it's amazing. So do you think change is going to come from the top down?
No. Absolutely not. We need to chop the head off, as far as I'm concerned. No, change will definitely come from the bottom. But hopefully, if we can get health professionals on board, then they will educate their patients, and it will go much further. If our medical education is plant-based dominant, if they get their hands, everybody's hands, the food industry, pharmaceutical industry, Adventist Church, ethical, Doctors for Nutrition. Doctors for Nutrition are an animal rights activist sort of group. This is the underlying, but you wouldn't know that. Doctors for Nutrition sounds amazing. Yeah. So when you look deeper into all these things, if we end up with a medical education that is demonizing animal proteins and fats, we're in big trouble.
Yeah, it's really hard to reverse. So who do you think could stand to lose if we focused on getting nutrients that we need from food without excess energy?
Food, pharma, all the associations, they rely on their. The issue is a lot of people have gone into Diabetes Australia, Heart Foundation, all of these places to be patient advocates or to think they're going to make it better. But if they don't know the truth, if they don't understand that, animal proteins and fats aren't the worst thing in the world, and we can't save the world by all eating processed soy. If these people don't understand that messaging, they're just promulgating the education, the messaging that they've been taught. Then but also, how do you, as a medical professional, tell someone that maybe you did the wrong thing, or maybe you had the wrong information and you've been creating harm for the last 20, 30 years? It's also very confronting. Some people might prefer to just carry on with their profession and finish. Others, like David Unwin and Gary, go, you know what? I'm really sorry. That was wrong. Let me make it up. Let's do something. You know, Prime Yoga Nathan, he's at the beginning of his work, and
he's
Paul
an
Mason, all
amazing
these
man.
others. So they can take it in right now and they don't have to worry. But there's a lot of people, a lot of GPs who've been band-aiding sick care based on guidelines shaped by vested interests and ideology that had no idea. And how do they respond? You know, you've got the 5 stages of grief. It's a very powerful thing to say you're sorry to someone. So ground up, people's stories, your work. Let's
So
make
what
it
can
loud.
people do at a grassroots level to change nutritional dogma and move on in their own family, and to share it, to get the word out?
In Tassie, we're really, really lucky. I'm surrounded by a pasture just looking out there. So I am able to access fresh local seasonal food and support local farmers here. I realize it's not as easy for everybody to be able to do that, but I think eating minimally processed food, considering what is the best for our optimizing our nutrition, for our metabolic health, for our hormone production, for all of those essential functions, and for having health in our life, we need to just consider what we're eating and try and put your blinkers on when you just see the constant marketing of junk food coming at you. James Mucky's managed to get all the junk food out of the Australia Post around Australia.
Wow.
I think that's fantastic.
Awesome.
You walk in there and there's no junk food in there anymore. So, you know, people can start to make changes. And if you don't buy the junk food in Australia Post, then they're going to stop selling it. But that's really fantastic that he did that. So it's just about making your choices and just trying to change things and create health for your family.
Yeah, and if you've got the means, invest in the fresh local produce that tastes amazing, that's grown in an environment that will regenerate the environment. It'll create a diverse, healthy, robust ecosystem, which Gary talks about a whole lot, that'll hold the soil there, that'll build back nutrients for future generations. It's a really exciting mission. And if you don't have beautiful pasture in Tasmania with the best food, then still source the best tasting whole foods that you can, and nourish your body, nourish your family, and be the change, I suppose. You've got to start with...
Be the change.
Yeah, yourself, and that's what you guys are doing. So what are you excited about for the future? You've got so much passion. I reckon the next 40 years hold a lot of excitement for you.
I'm excited because Gary and I we're doing this together, which is also really lovely. And so we're on a mission. We bounce ideas off each other. He's definitely the science and I'm definitely the research. But we've been talking about this for 7 years together. So a lot of his ideas sort of start to permeate and mine go into his brain as well. And I just think our mission is to just keep advocating for our farmers. Gary went and spoke at the beef and cattle industry meeting in Rockhampton. And he was really excited to do that because he said it's taking it a little bit outside the low carb sphere. And I'm certainly creating more and more contacts with local farmers, local producers, and hopefully even getting some submissions to government about, where can we take this messaging? There's no point trying to do it with APRA medical guidelines and diabetes guidelines. They're struggling because of their funding and compromised, I believe, because of funding. The CEO of the American Diabetes Association, Tracy, she has type 2 diabetes, first person as a CEO with type 2 diabetes. And she read Richard Bernstein's book, and she started going low carb. She came off her medications. She was off her insulin. She thought she would get rid of all medications by 2020. Said she just loved being the poster girl, showing you could take back control, and couldn't believe that she didn't know about it earlier. Well, then she was told to quieten down.
Wow.
And again, that advocacy, certainly it's starting to get into the guidelines quietly and should be pushing for it as hard as she could. But who funds it?
Yeah.
The pharmaceutical industry. So, yeah, it's a tough thing. So I think ground up, and I'm excited to keep pushing from the ground. And thanks so much for having me on and hearing a bit of my research, because
I love it.
the more people we can share this messaging with, more people will start to question and think about their health.
Yeah,
and maybe
and
not
take it into their
supporting.
own hands and be the change and look after themselves and their family, and that'll spread, and maybe there'll be a little niche of people who are able to optimize their nutrition and look completely different to the dystopian future that we may be facing if this all continues. So that's what I'm excited about, that the people who want to make a change, we can say, hey, here are the foods that contain the nutrients you need.
Absolutely.
Chase them. It's dietary agnostic. You don't need a belief system. You just need foods that contain the nutrients you need. So.
I loved your comment. You were saying something about religion and ethical beliefs and vested interests derail our, natural. They're derailing our understanding of what's healthy and what's not, and what we choose to eat. Gary said, take emotions out, and yeah, both of you. It's a really powerful messaging, and I think that's the most important takeaway from this talk.
Yeah.
Take those subjective messaging influences out and just think about your health. Focus on the nutrients.
Yeah. Be selfish in a way, but that being selfish will regenerate the planet by creating a diverse ecosystem will not just, create the products of agriculture with the minimum energy input, will create a diverse ecosystem that will be here in 50, 100 years that will want to live in. So that's what I'm excited about as well. So, and
healthy people to live in it.
Yeah. Anyway, WALL-E is such a dystopian. Have you seen WALL-E? Fascinating movie.
Yes, Gary's made us watch it many times.
Yeah, that's a scary future that we may be heading for. So hopefully we can get off that train for those people who want to. So thank you so much for your time. It's been so much fun. You're such a wonderful human being, and hopefully we can catch up in person again soon. And thank you.
Sounds great.
Thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Linda. Cheers. Bye.